Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Today we'll be talking about the narcissistic wound. The narcissistic wound is a wound created in childhood that is an injury to the self. So the child suffering, being mistreated, being humiliated, critical parent, teacher, feeling rejected by peers, is going to have an emotional injury, a psychological injury to the self. Now, because that is pretty difficult to quantify, the self, how do you quantify an injury to the self? There really is no way of identifying that there's a wound at all. So the child, in this case, is often able to protect themselves using a false self. But with regards to this wound, the personality that gets created when there is an injury to the self is one of a defense, is one of protective. Now, in the case of the narcissistic or narcissist, the individual we call narcissist, the personality is really created to deflect, to remove accountability, and to ultimately remove from these very painful feelings of feeling like a failure, feeling shame, feeling guilt, and like a nothing, like a loser, like someone who's not worthy of being alive or even existing. These feelings are extraordinarily painful. So the narcissistic wound is hard to measure outside of the individual's emotions, which are always deniable, whether it's the defense mechanism of projection or stuffing down your feelings, reaction formation. The narcissistic shell is essentially a protective mechanism to really protect from these injuries, these wounds. So it doesn't always lead to narcissism, having a narcissistic injury. I think this is very profound and important to go into, because a narcissistic injury is healable. You can heal from narcissistic abuse in childhood. The issue is that the child, oftentimes being overwhelmed emotionally and not really necessarily emotionally aware or even strong enough, again, not calling them out, it's such a reality situation, they're just not going to have the bandwidth to fight back and really hold on to that true sense of self. So the wound will oftentimes, they will succumb to this emotional wound, and ultimately their true self will drown in these negative feelings. So a narcissistic injury is what's referred to when these wounds get tripped up. Now, these wounds get tripped up when a scenario plays out in daily life, that reminds the narcissistically injured person of their pain. Now, the defense mechanism is really to shut out any memories, any triggers, any wounds, any experiences that are associated with this pain. Now, the problem is that because we're not machines, we can't just disconnect from part of ourselves. They always come trickling back subtly, slowly, whether it's through a memory, someone around us who is similar to our abuser. Now, when the wound is tripped up, there's going to be a certain amount of perceived confrontation, criticism, or feeling extremely slighted. Now, this is going to cause oftentimes narcissistic rage, narcissistic shame. Old memories that are repressed are going to get triggered, and the narcissist will really start to go into a certain seemingly demonic-like existence where everyone's the enemy, and they absolutely need to punish and hurt anyone who dare trip up these wounds. Now, at this point, self-loathing, core shame, the inner bruised self will go into that defense mechanism because of these very extremely painful feelings. According to Ross Rosenberg, who, by the way, is wonderful, I believe he's a coach. He's also a drug and alcohol specialist. He is fantastic. He wrote a very, very good book, highly suggest reading, called The Human Magnet Syndrome. He says that he discusses the defense mechanisms that the narcissist goes into, and they include denial, displacement, conversion, fantasy, intellectualization, projection, rationalization, reaction formation, regression, repression, sublimation, and suppression. So I'm not going to go into all those details. Feel free to check them out. The most notable one is the projection, that I can see as being really just almost instantaneous and reactionary, because when a person is in a projection mode, that really is the way they see their wounds is on the outside. They don't see them within. They see other people as wounded. They'll oftentimes say, "Oh, you're such a narcissist." They'll say that, or they'll say, "Oh, you're such a this or that," and oftentimes they'll be just referring to themselves but projecting it outward. It seems that narcissists often know exactly what their victims are suffering from or other people are suffering from, but really this is just a projection. The injury has been projected outward, placed onto others, who are then considered a perceived threat to be defended against. The irony is that they're really the ones with the injury, but they're protecting themselves against others who have taken on these projections, and then ultimately the victims get punished because they're the ones who are reminding the narcissist of their wounds. Narcissists cannot take responsibility for their rage. They need the supply, so they won't apologize. They will apologize oftentimes, but they don't really, just because they don't want to lose their supply. They don't want to lose. They don't want to be abandoned. But in reality, they cannot take responsibility for their rage, their actions, and their wounds. Victims often feel like they're walking on eggshells when they are around the narcissistic abuser. Narcissists are extraordinarily critical and hurtful and obviously judgmental towards others, and therefore victims of narcissistic abuse will find themselves trying to walk around, but really essentially what they're doing is just avoiding the wound. In reality, the whole personality is designed to protect the wound, so the walking on eggshells is really just another form of protecting themselves from tripping up the narcissistic wound of the narcissist and then getting punished for it. Here are some tips to protect yourself from really taking on the projection of a narcissistic wound and being the object of punishment, of humiliation, of rejection, shaming, guilting, you name it, of a narcissistic abuser. First of all, walk away. You don't need to defend the abuser, the behavior of the abuser. If they trip up and go into a rage, go into a shame-based, humiliating tirade, that is certainly not your responsibility. And this is tricky when it comes to parents, because we oftentimes feel that our parents are our parents and we have to make excuses for them and just suck it up for them. But in reality, we do not. Nobody is responsible for someone else's pain and wounds. Do not react defensively. These projections, these wounds are not yours. They're given. They're a lot of, they really are just. They're trying. Essentially, the narcissist is trying to give you them. It's trying to make you take. Trying to help have you identify with that projection. Projective identification. They want you to take on that projection, but ultimately speaking, it's just totally inappropriate and totally not your wound. And every person who's wounded needs to take responsibility for their wounds. In addition, this will play into the narcissistic game. If you do, for a second or even a little while, take on that identification, they will see you as weak, and they will see you as someone who is more than willing to take on the shame and guilt, and they'll pile it on. So never be subject to that. Find your inner wounds with a therapist and own your shadows, own your stuff, because if we don't own our stuff, we're at risk of thinking that other people, first of all, we become very codependent because we give away our power, but also we're at risk of thinking that other people will come along and fix those parts of ourselves. Nobody can fix those parts of yourself. Only yourself. Only you have the power to do that. Nobody else does. So be sure to own your own stuff. Don't forgive very easily. Don't forgive and go back. This is, of course, without changed behavior, attitudes, and true healing. If you forgive, you will certainly be playing into the game of the narcissist, because they will see you as, again, they will see you as weak. They will see you as somebody who's easily able to be taken advantage of, and ultimately you'll give them another chance. And don't go back just because you don't want to be alone. Being alone is infinitely less destructive than being with somebody who absolutely will torment your emotional well-being. See, and ultimately see why you're going back to a relationship where you're taking on somebody else's wounds, and almost the relationship becomes a shared ground to protect, to feed, to really defend the narcissist. So the relationship totally gets hijacked. There is no relationship with a narcissist. It really is just a big ploy to protect them from life and from getting re-injured. See why you're going back to a dynamics like this. Again, you're not a bad person for going back to a dynamics like this, but ultimately speaking, when we have our own wounds, oftentimes we look for other wounded people to play into their dysfunction. We want to make sure we don't do that, and see what it is about yourself and heal that part of yourself. When you do that, you're in a much better position to not play into the dysfunction and ultimately set boundaries and walk away and heal. Lastly, narcissistic injuries are not about you. They have nothing to do with you. When they make you feel bad and they make you feel a certain way, know that this is a ploy. Narcissistic abusers, emotional manipulators, emotionally abusive bullies are able to make you feel bad about something that you did not do. That is part of the game. Now it's your job to make sure that you don't take on that mistreatment and identify with what they're telling you. And even if you feel those feelings, know that those feelings are being given to you. Those are being manufactured. Those are being manipulated. Those are being put into you so that you feel bad. And when you feel bad, oftentimes you'll try to correct it by pleasing the abuser. This again plays into the dysfunction of the narcissist. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. All the best.